Hi everyone, welcome back. This week we're going to be talking about objects, and we're going to spread this topic over a couple of weeks actually. We've already introduced objects a little bit when we talked about creating variables, when we use the curly brackets and then sort of package many variables together as a bundle. So we've already introduced objects, but objects are actually a lot more than that in JavaScript. We're going to not introduce any new syntax. Instead, we're going to focus on let's get to know working with objects a little bit better. What that means is that we're going to introduce a few of the built-in objects that come with P5. We're going to talk about strings and text. We're going to talk about images and sounds. And for all of these object variables are going to represent this concept of having both data, in other words, variables and functions bundled together into one package. And we'll kind of get familiar with using objects. So let's start with this first example. We are going to be talking about text, and we're going to introduce how to load fonts, how to create assets for our sketches, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the string object as our first example. So let's dive right into it. Okay. So we've already, so first let's set the stage for a few things here. I'm going to, let's say, set a white fill, and then we're going to translate the origin to the center for this sketch. Okay, so we're going to start with a translate to the center like so, and then we're going to use the text function here, and we're going to write a message. We are going to say hello everyone, and the value that I put in here, the coordinate, is going to be a position. Okay, so I think we've used text before in this tutorial, but if we haven't, the first parameter is going to be a string, so it's inside double quotes, and then afterwards we have the coordinate. Okay? So if I run the text like so, if I run the code like so, of course I don't want to draw it at width and height over 2. I've already translated my origin. My bad. Okay, so here's my text, and there's a few basic commands we can use. If you want to look at the whole list, you can take a look at the reference, but we can change the alignment using text align, and we can also set the text size using the text size command. Okay, so I'm just going to make the text a little bit bigger, and when you change the alignment, of course, the coordinate you specify is now the center of that message. So, so strings here we saw can also be assigned to variables, right? So we could take this message and put it into a variable, okay? And I'm going to be lazy here. I'm going to cut, paste, and let's turn off the auto refresh. Let's put down message and hit play. Okay. So we can put text string into variables. Okay? And what that means is that it now creates what's called a message object. Sorry, a string object, my bad. So in JavaScript, string objects contain data, right? So they contain all the characters that make up our string. So they have some variable inside of them that holds most likely an array of characters, all the letters. But in addition to being a kind of a package of information, they also contain functions. So let's see if they have a reference page for string. They do. Okay. Let's take us over here. Actually, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So we'll see that strings, right, contain data, but what I'm looking for here is the methods. Okay, that's where I am. So strings contain data. They also they have properties, right? So just like arrays, we have a length attribute to a string, and we'll demonstrate all of that in P5 in a second. And then over here, we have what's called methods. Okay, so the methods, when we talk about objects, they're basically all the functions that are contained inside that object. These are things that this object can do in our program. So just as a glance here, and we don't have to kind of look at all of them, make this text a little bit bigger if I can. I can't. The at a glance, all right. Oh, I broke the page somehow. There we go. So we have all of these functions here. These are things that belong to a string object. So for example, we have a function that lets us pick a specific character, right? We can combine pieces of text So we don't have to get into too much in depth here, but there's all these different options, right? We can replace chunks of text, search a string for some text, and so forth, right? We can check if it starts with a character, we can get a substring, change the case, right? These are all things that our string object can do. Okay, so let's take a look at what that means in terms of the code in P5. So for example, I could go and say message to uppercase. Okay, and then if I run the code again, this doesn't change the message itself. I have to say message equal message.toUppercase, right? Now what I'm doing is I'm using a method of the string object. So I have this object variable, and in addition to have some variable, some information inside of it, it also comes with functionality. Okay, so this is a really important concept when it comes to objects, and we're going to explore that in all the examples this week. So our variables now, they're kind of superpowered because they have information and they also come with some code that will act on whatever is inside that object. Okay, so this is just an example. Here's another thing we can do with a piece of text, right? We could ask for a specific character. For example, if I want to get the first character in the string, right? Think of it as an array, right? Where every character has an index. Then I could use its charAt, character at method or function, right? So we can access individual characters. That means, you know, we could use a variable here. Let's call it I for now. We could say maybe I'm going to map mouse x, which goes from 0 to width. I'm going to map it to a number between 0 and message.length. So message.length being the number of letters I have in my string. And then we could use that here. Okay. Now we always have to be a little bit careful when we use map as an index because it will return a decimal point value. So let's just run it, see what happens. Okay. So that still works because I guess the character at function will get rid of the decimal point if it doesn't need it. So that's well programmed. But if we wanted to make sure we did it ourselves, we could also use the floor function. Okay. So floor is going to take a number and then it's going to just round it down, get rid of the decimal point. Okay, so that would achieve the same thing. But it sounds like this character at function is pretty smart. Okay, so this allows us to write programs where we might draw the string one letter at a time. Okay, so what could we do with that? Well, we could anything really. So just to give a little example, let's imagine we're going to write a for loop that, like, we're going to write some code that's going to write our message along a circle, okay, just for kind of do a layout for a text, just as an example, knowing that now we have access to individual characters inside our string. Okay? So we're going to replace this I variable here, which currently is my mouse cursor. We're going to replace this with a for loop that's going to go through and draw all the letters one at a time. So we're going to count from 0. We're going to stop when we reach message.length. And now we're going to draw all of our letters. Okay. Now, obviously, they're all bunched up on top of each other here. So let's add some transformations in there so that we can spread the text out a little bit more. First, we're going to go and we're going to set angle mode to degrees. Just a little bit more intuitive. And then we're going to do some push and pop because we're about to translate the origin and rotate it. So we are going to use push and pop to make sure each character, right, can get its own transforms. So first, let's define a radius. Okay, I'm going to call it R. That's going to be the radius of my circle that we're going to move the letters around. Okay. So we're going to translate. Let's translate to the right here. We're going to translate by R and 0. Okay, so this is going to shift our origin over here. Okay, so this translates over there, and then what we're going to want to do is rotate every letter around this circle. Okay, so how do I find out which angle, right, we want to be at? Well, we could use the counter. So let's say now that we've before we translate, right? Let's call this angle. We're going to map the counter. So we know counter goes from 0 to message.length minus 1. Okay? And let's map this to an angle between 0 and 360 degrees. See what that looks like. And then, of course, it would help if we applied it using a rotation. Okay, cool. So we can see now this is sort of spreading out, right? The the text around the circle. It does come right back to the beginning, which is something I don't necessarily want. So let's go -2. Nope. Message.net, the other way around. All right. Cool. Okay. And the that's good. So 360 degrees. And that's a little bit hard to read. So let's also rotate the letters before we draw them. Okay, so we're going to rotate the letters by 90 degrees. Now I'm doing this after the translate, right? So just again to go over these transformations. So first we rotate the canvas to go to the right direction, the right pi position for our letter. Then we translate away by R. And then once we're there, we're going to translate again by 90 degrees. All right, so now we have all of our letters around the circle. And it would be nice if we started over here instead of over there. So before we do this whole thing, we are going to rotate the whole canvas by 180 degrees. Okay, so now we can read this a little bit better. It says, hello, everyone around the circle. Okay. And then just for fun, we could also add some interactivity. Let's say we're going to use our mouse cursor here to decide how far, like how many degrees we want to spread this text around. So instead of going the full 360, we're going to define a variable that will determine that. We're going to map the mouse x value, which goes from 0 to width. We're going to map this to a number between 0 and 360. Okay, so that's going to allow us to change using our mouse cursor. How much we're spreading out these letters. So having this maximum angle here, we're going to replace it in our angle map over there. So instead of always mapping to the full 360, whatever mouse x is going to control that maximum angle. So now we can even create this fun little animation where all the letters appear to pop out of the first letter. Just for fun, right? So this is possible because, again, message is an object, right? So message is an object, a simple string, but we also know now that strings comes with some benefits. They have some properties like length here, right? And they have some functions that are built in. When we talk about objects, the correct technical terms for those are methods. So charAt is a method of the string variable here, message. And every different object type has different methods, has different functions that come with it. How do you know what these are? Well, you have to look up the documentation for that particular object. So that's either part of the P5 reference, or in this case, the string object is a more general, basic JavaScript object. So I just Googled string and JavaScript to find that documentation page that outlines, this particular object has dozens of methods that basically allow you to do manipulations on the text, read the text certain ways, transform it, so forth. So objects kind of come with these bits of functionality that are bundled with the data that they contain. Okay? All right. So before we move on, let's also use that as an opportunity to talk a little bit about asset files, because we're going to reuse that this week in all the examples. Let's make this example a little prettier. And what I mean by that is we're going to replace the default font here with a different font. Okay? So the way we change the font is in setup, or anytime you want to draw, really. You can change the font multiple times if you want. You can use the text font command. And I think by default, the font is Arial or something like that. We could replace it to another font, like Courier. This is pretty limited, though, because it relies on the font being installed on your system. So if you want to use a very specific kind of custom font, what you have to do is you have to first create a font object from a font file. Okay? So I'm going to show you how to do that in our sketch. Let me save this here. So the way that we access files in our sketch is, remember we have this little arrow here. In your case, it might still be open. I'm going to click the little arrow next to the name of my sketch, and that's going to open the sketch files panel over here. And normally we just have these three files in our sketch. We have our index, sketch.js, and style. And what we're going to do is we're going to upload a file. Okay, so for this example today, I have this this TTF file, okay, called YouTube star. I found it on some free font style. It's the license is clear for personal use. So we're gonna use this font here to change the text font in our program. So first we have to upload the file as an asset. The way we do this is we click on that little arrow here, and then we click on upload file. This is going to open up a dialog box, and then we can go and simply just drag the file you want over into here. We can drop it. It's going to upload it, okay, and then once you get a little check mark, you can just close that window. And now we have a file over here. Just a side note on files, there's a limit on the free p5.js editor that we're using, how many files you can upload. I'm going to save my sketch here. You can see how many you have if you go into your profile over here, your user menu, and you click on My Assets. It's going to give you a list of all the files that you've uploaded connected to like different sketches that you might have. Okay, so I don't know where the file we just uploaded here. I have just a bunch of random sketches. You probably have nothing right now, but just it's in there somewhere. And this is showing you we can only have 250 megabytes of assets, so it's pretty small, okay, but it's free. For the purposes of our course and even for the final project and the game, everything will fit within that size here. But of course, down the road, if you want to use P5 to build bigger projects, you'll probably want to host them yourself somewhere. And we might later on in this term make a video talking about how you would do that. Okay? So right now, I have used up 10% of my space. And of course, if you have sketches that have assets you don't need anymore, you can delete them to make more space. Okay? All right. So a little parenthesis here. They only give us 250 megs of free space, but this is enough for just messing around and learning how to program. So what we're going to do now is, now that I have this YouTube star TTF file, I'm going to define a variable. I'm going to call it font. And then in setup, I'm going to go font equals load font. So load font is a function that will take a file name as the parameter, as a string. So my font is called YouTube star, I think. Capital S. So it's important to maintain the correct spelling. It's going to load that, and it's going to return it as a font object. Okay? And then we can apply it using text font. So instead of Courier, we're going to say text font. Okay? Now this might work, this may not. Let's hit play and see what happens. Okay, so this didn't work. All right, and now I just have the default here. It's telling me it had a problem loading the font. Okay, unsupported type signature, not, and so forth. So there's been an error loading this font, and that's because if you load a file in JavaScript, what happens is what happens first of all is that I have a typo in my file name. And by the way, if you're following this, your own example, feel free to use whatever font you can find. Okay, any font will work. Let me try it again. I think this time it will work, but yeah, so that worked, but this is not what I wanted to talk about. So of course, typos will make things not work. I want to talk about what happens when we load assets in a JavaScript program. Now, when we call it load font, if it's a very small file, it may what needs to happen is your browser needs to download the file from the server, okay? And then it will be able to create the object. And that happens in a process called, it happens in an asynchronous process, okay? Which means that load font, when it returns, doesn't immediately create the font object. It kind of does its thing on the side, okay? And when it's done, it will create the font object. The program carries on, and depending on the file that you're loading, if it's an image or a sound or sometimes a video file, this can take a few seconds to download from the server. So your object may not be ready to use when you're using it. In this case, I got away with it. It could also be because the file is cached in my browser. That worked. But if you want to play it safe, okay, there is a function that we can implement. I'm going to put it before setup called preload. Okay. I'm going to put it up here. And preload is a p5 function that basically says if you use load functions like load font, and then in other examples today we're going to use load image and load sound. If you load assets, put them into preload, and what that function will do is it will wait for all of the things you put inside preload to have completely downloaded before running setup. And this will ensure that your variables and objects are available for your code to use if they, for some reason, they take a little longer to download. Okay? So this is always a good idea to use the preload function when you're just for loading assets, and then that's will ensure they're available once you get into setup and then start using them. Okay. Cool. All right. Awesome. And finally, let's just do one last small thing, just for fun. Okay, we're going to add a different color here to each of the letters. We're going to sort of create a gradient, map each letter to a color palette. Now, I've already put together a color palette here. I'm going to grab it from a different file, but looks something like this. Okay, so we've seen this before. This is just a bunch of HTML colors, and I put it into an array called palette. You can generate those yourself, or you can go into any number of like free color palette generators and they will create those for you. And just for fun, okay, so the fill is what changes the color of text. So I'm going to change the fill color as I'm about to draw different letters here. And we are going to generate an index into this color palette based on the loop counter. So just like we did over here, we are going to say map I, and that goes between 0 and message.length, right? So this is the position of our current letter. We're going to map this to 0 and palette.length -1. So just like strings, palette is an array. Arrays are actually objects, and they happen to have a .length attribute. They have other attributes we can use. All kinds of fun things you can do with arrays. You can sort values and so forth. If you want to explore that further, feel free to look for JavaScript array object documentation. And then let's apply the fill color, right? We're going to say fill palette color index. Now, again, this may not work because I'm using map, and map returns a floating point number. So let's just see what happens. If I run it, right, I get some error. It's struggling, right, to access the index of the array here. So unlike charAt, which was very forgiving, color index is not so much. It has to be an integer. So we'll simply turn it into an integer by using the floor function here. We'll say floor color index. Okay. So floor, it rounds down, okay, and drops the decimal point. Now this works. Very nice. Cool. So now we have some colored text as well. Okay, so that's it for this example. We're going to do 2 more examples this week, going a little bit further into existing objects. The next one is about images. I will see you there.